In this section on Network Operating System Fundamentals, we will look at the components of a network operating system. Computer software falls into two general categories: operating systems and applications. And common applications include Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, and Microsoft Access. But we're not concerned with applications, we are concerned with operating systems. And we have client operating systems and server operating systems. In a local area network, we have workstations or clients, and the software that controls the client workstations is the client operating system. And a client operating system would be, for example, Windows 7 or Windows 8 or Windows 10. And then on the file server, we need an operating system as well, and a server operating system is also called a network operating system. And an example of a network operating system would be Windows 2012 Server. We have client operating systems and server operating systems. So let's answer the question, what does an operating system do? An operating system is a piece of software that controls and coordinates the hardware, software, and data components of a computer. Here's the example. Let's look at old DOS. It stands for Disk Operating System, and it's a good name because it helps us to access the hard disk. For example, if you or I type up a file and we want to save it to the hard disk, we want to save it on a portion of the hard disk that has free space. But you and I don't know that track 3, sector 12 has free space. We just click on File Save, and the operating system finds a free spot on the hard disk and saves the file there. Conversely, if you want to run some program such as Microsoft Word or Microsoft Excel, it has to come off of the hard disk. But you and I, we don't know that Microsoft Word is located on track 3, sector 18. We just double click and the operating system finds the program that we want to use, such as Microsoft Word, located on track 3, sector 18, and it pulls it off the hard disk and it loads it into memory. A hard disk, an operating system, is a piece of software that controls and coordinates the hardware, software, and data components of a computer. So now let's get a little more specific and look at operating system components: the kernel, services, the registry, and the user interface. The kernel is the main operating system program. It's a big program. And when you boot a computer, what it does is it loads the kernel into memory. If we go to the C drive, to the Windows folder, to the System32 folder, we will see that there is a file here, and that is the kernel. And the name of this file is called NOS Kernel.exe. NT stands for New Technology, OS stands for Operating System, KRNL is short for kernel, and EXE means it is an executable file. It is the operating system. Whatever you do, don't delete that file. And then another component of the operating system are services. And a service is a program which has no interface. It runs, but the user doesn't know it. A service is a program that provides some service or benefit for the user, but the user doesn't even know that that service is running. And a perfect example is the DHCP service. If we go into the Computer Management Console under Services, we will see there is the DHCP client service. And whenever you turn on a Windows 7 computer or any Windows computer, the user doesn't know it, but it starts up the DHCP client service. And what that does is it sends a signal out to the DHCP server requesting an IP address. The DHCP client sends a signal to the DHCP server requesting an IP address. Now, if you're computer is unable to grab an IP address, maybe there's something wrong with the DHCP client service. So what we do is we right-click on that service and we select properties and we verify that it is configured for automatic setup. And if it has been disabled, then that service is not going to grab IP addresses from the DHCP server. A service is a program without an interface. It provides some sort of benefit to the user, and the user doesn't even know that that service is running. And there are many types of services. The registry. The registry is a configuration file that stores all configuration variables. To view the registry, you use the regedit command. You go to the command prompt and you type regedit, and this is the registry editor. And you can see, for example, on this computer, the registry stores the name of the computer, it specifies the domain name, and it specifies the IP address of the DHCP server that this particular computer is using. The registry stores all configuration variables. There are two types of user interfaces: the graphical user interface, the GUI, which is the point and click interface, and the command line interface, where you have to type the commands in. So let's look at an example of each one. If I wanted to format a disk using the graphical user interface, I would go to the disk that I wanted to format, right-click, click on Format, and then I would click on Start. The graphical user interface is the point and click interface. Now, to format a disk using the command line, I would go to the command prompt and I would type format space E:. The command line is a little harder to use, but you will find as you get to more and more advanced levels of computing, you use the command line more and more. The purpose of an operating system is to, for one, to act as a file server, meaning a centralized location that people can save data to. But there are other purposes of an operating system as well. An operating system can act as a print server, or a domain controller, which is a login server, or a web server, or an application server, or a DHCP server, or a DNS server. An operating system can perform many different functions. So you could say that the purpose of an operating system is to act as a platform onto which you can install the file server or the print server or the domain controller if you want to. Let's look a little more closely at the file server role. Let's look at file servers and file sharing. What is meant by sharing and what is meant by mapping. Here is a file server right here, and it has a hard disk, and there is a folder on the hard disk, the accounting folder, that I want the users to be able to get to. So what I need to do is to share that folder. To share a folder means to make it available so users can connect to it. And then connecting to a shared folder is called mapping a network drive. We share a folder on the server, and then we go to the workstation and we map a network drive to that shared folder. And mapping a network drive is making a connection to the shared folder. So let's do it. Let's go to the server and share a folder. So I will go to the server and I will go to the Windows Explorer, and there's the C drive, and there's the accounting folder that I want to share to make available for users to connect to. So to share the folder, I right-click on the accounting folder and select Properties. Then I select the Sharing tab, and I select the button that says Advanced Sharing. I click on that button, and all I have to do is click on this checkbox that says Share this folder. That's all I need to do to share the folder. And then the folder is now shared, and now users can connect to that shared folder. So let's now go to the workstation to connect to that shared folder. And this is called mapping a network drive. So I go to the Windows 7 workstation, I go to the Windows Explorer, and on the network icon, I right-click and I select Map Network Drive. And I select Map Network Drive. And then I type, if I can remember the name of the server and the name of the shared folder, I can type it in. Server 1, the accounting folder. But if I don't know that for sure, I can click on the Browse button. And the Browse button shows all the computers that are up and running and the shared folders. And I can see there is the accounting folder on server 1. So I click on OK, and now we can see for this workstation, the Z drive will be mapped to the accounting folder on server 1. I click on Finish, and now if the user saves to the C drive, the user will be saving files to his or her own local hard disk. But if the user saves to the Z drive, the user will actually be saving to the accounting folder on server 1. If the user saves to the Z drive, the user will actually be saving to the accounting folder on server 1. Mapping is done on the server. Sharing is what you do on the server. To share folder means to make it available. And you go to the workstation and perform mapping, which means connecting to a shared folder. So the role of a file server operating system, can be to simply be a file server, but it can also perform other roles as well, such as authentication and authorization. And that's what a domain controller does. A domain controller is often known as a login server or an authentication server. So what's the difference between authentication and authorization? If you are authorized to access the payroll database, that means you can access a particular file. Authorization says you are allowed to access certain files. But to be authenticated means to be logged in. And to be logged in, you must have a username and a password on the domain controller, which is the login server. To be authenticated, you must have a username and a password on the domain controller. The domain controller is the login server, and on the domain controller is Active Directory, and that is the name of the database of usernames and passwords. So if a new employee is hired at the company, then you go into Active Directory, and then you create a new user so that person can log in. Or when an employee leaves the company, you delete the user, or when somebody forgets his password, you change the user's password. This is called everyday account management. So I want to create a new user. I go to Active Directory, and I right-click on Users, and I select New, and I click on User. And then I type in the user's first name and the user's last name, in this case Bob White, and then I give the user a login name. And the login name is usually the first letter of the first name followed by the last name. Then I click on Next, I assign the user a password, and I confirm the password. Then I click on Next, and if I click on Finish, we can see I have now created a new user named Bob White. If Bob forgets his password, I can reset his password. And when Bob leaves the company, I can delete his user account. User account management involves creating users, deleting users, and changing users' passwords. And this concludes our section on network operating system components.